Good evening, one and all. I'm delighted to welcome you, so many faces, many familiar faces and names to this, the first Global Futures of Irish Studies Roundtable in our seminar series. I should introduce myself. My name is Dr. Darragh Gannon. I'm based at Queen's University, Belfast, but this evening I'm speaking to you as the Vice President of the Global Irish Diaspora Congress. And I'm conscious of the time differences which span the Irish studies world this evening. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're attending around the world. It's my great pleasure to welcome our guests from the European Federation of Associations and Centres of Irish Studies, EFACIS, this evening in the first of our Global Futures of Irish Studies Roundtable. And to begin this evening, I'd like to welcome our President of the Global Irish Diaspora Congress, Professor Regina E. Chollatáin, who will say something about our organisation. Regina, over to you.
Gurm legat Dáta agus céad míle fáilte rover fad. Just delighted to welcome you all to this, our inaugural roundtable series on the global futures of Irish studies. And as Dáta correctly said there, we are absolutely thrilled to be welcoming our EFACIS colleagues this evening, and wonderful to have the President of EFACIS with us as well, and our very esteemed guests who Dáta will be introducing later on. I'm just going to give a little bit of just a brief overview on where we're coming from on this, really, because this was one of the initiatives that we are undertaking as well under the global umbrella of our Global Irish Diaspora Congress. Many of you are familiar with the Global Irish Diaspora Congress because we have met you in UCD in 2017. This was an initiative where a few of us got together and I see some people in the chat there putting up some lovely messages, so please do use the chat. That's what it's lovely to see that, and we welcome you, as Dáta said, from all over. There's a really global aspect to this, but basically in probably 2016, really, as a result of commemorations and those kind of events, a few of us got together and maybe started off, if I may say so, with myself and Professor Tadhg O'Keefe and Professor Liam Kennedy having a cup of coffee in the Arts Cafe in the building and deciding to start up something with regard to the future of Irish studies and a global Irish diaspora. So fusing both, we decided to have a congress, and we put it to a few of our colleagues and brought our wonderful colleagues on board, most of whom are here tonight. There are only two people who can't be. Michael Wallace, who is our treasurer, and Professor Tadhg O'Keefe, who unfortunately can't be here for another reason. But the committee that we have, Dáta as our vice president, Aoife as our secretary, Owen as our digital communicator and communications expert, and Barbara also in the same role and also in marketing and events. So you've probably met them all already in some shape or form, and indeed myself. I'm not so sure how many of our international committee are here tonight, but I emailed you during the week just to give you a brief overview. So basically this is, and I'm going to read some of this just because I want to be brief, otherwise I could talk all night, because I'm so excited about this initiative, and it's we're very enthused to be able to unite our Irish diaspora and our Irish studies colleagues in so many guises and from so many countries and forums. So basically the Global Irish Diaspora Congress is a series that examines histories, cultures, heritage and identities and languages of Irish communities beyond Ireland's shores and within Ireland's shores. And of course, the quote is 70 million people worldwide claiming descent from Irish immigrants. Not so sure how accurate that is, but it seems to be what's out there. But for many decades, these are the things that we can say for sure. There has been considerable scholarly interest in the history of immigration from Ireland from its beginnings in the Middle Ages, through the 18th and 19th centuries, and in how Irishness has been and continues to be maintained and expressed by descendant communities. However, the sheer scale of Irish diaspora has created many obstacles to international conversations and exchange of ideas, and that is what we hope to amend. And if you go to our website, I won't say any more than that tonight, but if you go to our website, you will find all of the details on that. And we have looked on many ideas. Our idea in the beginning was the first Congress which included people from all over the world, and I mean all over the world, and from all corners. And it took place in University College Dublin in 2017. We had our AGM, and we hoped to follow up with our next Congress in 3 years. We said a Congress every 3 years, possibly every 2 years, but to get off the ground, we did. So our next Congress was supposed to be in 2020, and we were all ready to go. And I'm not sure if Donal is here tonight, Professor Donal McCracken, and we were due to have our next conference in the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, and of course COVID decided to put an end to that for us, but it hasn't ended it, because as any of you who are on the National Committee will know, we have agreed that we are going to have the conference in hopefully 2023 in Durban. We did consider having it online, but because we feel that a lot of the core ethic of the Global Irish Diaspora Congress is not only bringing our colleagues to Ireland, but bringing Ireland to the world. So we really want to embrace that universal and international aspect by visiting other countries and having that sense of community, no matter where we are in a global context. We're also contacting ISANS at the moment with a view to having a congress in Australia and New Zealand as well. So there's lots of possibilities, but in the meantime, we have other activities that we said, while we can't have that Congress, we said we are aiming for an online conference in 2022, which will ensure it will probably be on a lesser scale than what we would have had for Durban, but Durban will be going ahead, and we have the funding, we have everything lined up, and we have the ambassador as our patron. So we're very lucky that everything, and that is thanks to the work of Professor Donal McCracken. So that will be going ahead, but in 2022, in the meantime, please put your thinking caps on for what you would like to propose as your papers, because we will be putting out a call for papers in September 2022 for that Congress, and it will probably be in spring 2022. But our first and initial event, in order to make sure I have so fortunate with us, a wonderful staff, but a wonderful committee as well, who are so enthusiastic and agreed that we need to get going on this, and we need to make sure that we are active in the meantime. And thanks to the wonderful initiative of Dr. Darragh Gannon, who is our current Vice President, and also working with him on this, Dr. Aoife Whelan, who is our Head of Irish Studies in UCD. And Darragh initiated this, that we would have our global roundtable on Irish studies. So we're delighted to welcome, first of all, our European counterparts, and what better place to start than in Europe. And we will be having, just to flag that, we will be having a series of these, and Darragh will continue this, but we will also, for example, have our British counterparts, our American counterparts, Canadian counterparts, Australian, so every one of them. So we will get a much more global aspect on the global Irish studies aspect. So I'm going to hand over now. You won't hear from me till the very end of the night now, and I just want to welcome you all. I'd love to welcome you all with a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever, but please feel free to have whatever it is you're having while we're conducting this conference tonight. Thank you very much. Darragh.
Thank you, Regina, for that wonderful introduction. And I can safely say that I speak on behalf of the committee, and again, applauding you and saluting you for the tremendous leadership which you have shown as President of the Global Irish Diaspora Congress, especially during these difficult times in COVID. We have been tremendously indebted to your work, your efforts, your influence, and we're delighted to see that this series is coming on stream under your guidance. So again, thank you, Regina, for all you've done on behalf of the GIDC. So I'd just like to say a few words about the series more broadly to build on Regina's excellent introduction. Irish studies at home and abroad is facing an unknown future. The diminution of funding for Irish studies centres and programmes across the island, the elision of dedicated Irish studies positions at universities around the world, and the different challenges created by Brexit, North and South, have collectively called into question the future direction of Irish studies. The unprecedented economic, educational, and human crises precipitated by COVID-19 have indeed accelerated these difficulties, distancing academic dialogue between Irish studies scholars. And I think that's quite clearly represented and resonated in the themes of a number of conferences from our Irish studies colleagues around the world this year alone. So our Irish Studies colleagues in Spain, AEDEI, have gone with the theme Silences and Inconvenient Truths. Our colleagues in France, SOFAIR, have gone with the title Strange Country, Ireland in Politics and Culture. And ACIS this year, which will be held in June of 2021, has taken up the theme of healing. So I think this idea of bridging distance and difficulty certainly resonates with Irish Studies scholars around the world. The idea for this series of roundtables, true to form, began in Melbourne. I was lucky enough to have an Irish Studies Fellowship at the University of Melbourne in early 2020, pre-coronavirus, would you believe, if such a thing exists. And I was struck by the conversations which were happening with our colleagues, with Irish Studies colleagues in Melbourne, and how different they were to the conversations that was happening in Belfast and Dublin. And what resonated with me was the idea, I suppose D.P. Moran put it best in his Philosophy of Irish Ireland, published first in 1904, when he said, quote, "The native who has lived for years among a different group is usually the best equipped for the role of observer and critic," unquote. And in that regard, I think we're in a very strong position digitally to allow the conversation about the futures of Irish studies to be decentered beyond the island, to listen to our colleagues across Europe this evening and around the world henceforth. So the Global Futures of Irish Studies series aims to provide a platform for discussion of the global challenges and unique contexts facing Irish studies communities around the world. And this will be an ongoing series of online roundtable seminars. And each roundtable will be convened in association with an Irish Studies network in different geographical regions. So again, I'm delighted to be welcoming our colleagues in EFACIS rather this evening, who have given so generously of their time and thought to speak on their experiences, challenges, but also opportunities in the development of Irish studies in their region. And hopefully we will have a stimulating international conversation. And to that point, I'll just outline very briefly the schedule or format for this evening's discussion. So our EFACIS colleagues will open with 2-minute statements each, which will outline different aspects of Irish studies in the region of continental Europe. This will be followed by a roundtable discussion chaired by myself and my colleague, Dr. Aoife Whelan. And following that, we will have an open Q&A in which you, our audience, will be invited to ask questions directly of our EFACIS colleagues, but also contribute to potential collaborations, exchanges of ideas, and so on. So to add to what Regina said earlier, in the comment section, please do introduce yourself, where you're listening in from, university, your geographical region. We'd love to find out where you're listening from. But also during the panel discussion, if you have any ideas and or comments, feel free to type those in during the discussion. We will revisit them at the end, and you'll have an opportunity again at the very end to ask questions directly and to have your voices heard at the end of the panel discussion. So I'll now pass to my colleague, Dr. Aoife Whelan, who will introduce our guests for this evening. Aoife.
Hello and welcome to this evening's seminar. Thanks to both Darragh and Regina for that introduction and outlining the structure for tonight's session. It's my huge pleasure on behalf of the Global Irish Diaspora Congress to welcome our esteemed panellists tonight from the EFACIS Association. I'll begin with introductions for each of the panellists before handing over to them for their opening statements. First, we'll hear from Professor Katharina Rennhack, who is Professor of English Literary Studies at the University of Corporaal, and she is currently President of EFACIS and also a member of the ISIL Executive. Next, we'll hear from Professor Marguérite Corporaal from Radboud University, and Marguérite is currently PI on a number of funded projects related to Irish studies. Our third speaker will be Dr. Seán Crosson from NUI Galway, and Seán is a former president of EFACIS, as well as general editor of the Review of Irish Studies in Europe journal, and a series co-editor of the Irish Studies in Europe publication series. Our next speaker will be Dr. Radvan Markus from Charles University in Prague, and where he is a senior lecturer in the Irish language and literature. Radvan is currently the secretary of EFACIS and he will speak more on some of their current projects. And our final panelist is Professor Sylvie Mikowski from University de Rennes, Champagne-Ardenne, and I'm sure I haven't said that with a very nice accent at all. Sylvie is currently President of SOFIR, the French Society for Irish Studies, as well as a member of the EFACIS board and a review editor for the RISE journal. So at this point, I'll hand over to Katharina to begin the statements from our EFACIS colleagues, and I hope each of you will enjoy the discussions that follow.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Whelan, for this kind introduction. Thank you, Regina and Darragh, for the invitation and for so perfectly organizing this online event. We at EFACIS are really honored and absolutely thrilled that you have invited our federation to participate in this first Global Futures of Irish Studies roundtable discussion. Now, I will begin to give you a bit of basic information about EFACIS before I hand over to my colleagues who will each represent one particular aspect of our organization. Sylvie will speak about the role of the large national and regional networks within EFACIS. Marguérite will talk about our federation's approaches to the challenges of interdisciplinarity. Radvan will speak about the role of university-based centers and of our academic conferences, and Seán will speak about our publications. But some basics first. EFACIS, the European Federation of Centers and Associations of Irish Studies, was founded in Paris in 1996 to support the expansion of Irish studies throughout Europe. Over the past 25 years now, EFACIS has grown into a vibrant network of Irish studies scholars working in universities in Europe and beyond. And just to give you a brief visual impression here, you'll find a map of the centers of Irish studies. I hope you can see that here on our website. And if you take a closer look, you'll see that we spread from St. Petersburg to Granada in Spain, that we are well represented in the middle of Europe, France and Germany, and we move also from Darragh to our latest edition. Cairo has also a new Irish Studies Center and asked to be admitted to our European Federation because they have no other connections there. So a large and widely spread network of Irish studies scholars that has grown and is still growing. EFACIS is an international non-profit association under Belgian law based in the historic Irish College in Leuven. And it basically consists of three types of effective members: centers of Irish studies, national or regional associations of Irish studies, and also individual members who very often would otherwise work in relative isolation in their respective universities. Important strategic objectives of EFACIS are to facilitate and promote research on all aspects of society, culture, and literature, and of course history of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Irish diaspora. Another strategic aim is to support existing Irish studies centers across Europe and to stimulate the development of new centers. To strengthen the presence of Irish studies topics on curricula in European universities is also an important aim, and to promote interest in Irish culture among students and also beyond the universities, so with the general public. As such, EFACIS activities fall into three broad categories: research, third-level education, and cultural activities, all three of which strongly interact, we hope. And I think we deliver on that promise most of the time. It is certainly our track record of cultural activities that distinguishes EFACIS from other academic associations and networks. And I'm sure I'll get the chance to elaborate on some of our projects later in the discussion. I will just briefly mention here the Irish Itinerary, which allows Irish authors and artists to visit universities on tours through Europe. And actually, the Irish Itinerary, first initiated by our former president, Hedwig Schwal, is such a success story that we now have various different Irish Itinerary spin-offs, the digital Irish Itinerary, the Irish Itinerary podcast, and also an Irish Studies Itinerary. Other important projects are Kaleidoscope, more about this later if you want to hear more, and our translation projects, all under the general heading Literature as Translation. All these projects, as I said, seek to integrate culture, research, and education. But more about this later. I will open the floor now to my colleague, Sylvie Mikowski. You won't believe how short 2 minutes are.
So thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with you tonight. And as the current chair of SOFAIR, I'm very pleased to be offered the opportunity to speak about our association and its relationship with EFACIS. SOFAIR, the French Society of Irish Studies, was created in 1981 and includes today over 150 members. It's open mostly to scholars and academics, but also to all those who are interested in Irish culture, literature, and history. SOFAIR organizes a yearly conference which takes place each time in a different university in France. SOFAIR members also published an academic journal, Études Irlandaises, which is now online. SOFAIR was one of the founding members of EFACIS, partly thanks to the dedication of one of its most outstanding chairpersons, the late Professor Paul Brennan. Paul used his many connections to make this project of having a European network of Irish studies happen. Since then, SOFAIR has steadily supported EFACIS, deciding, for instance, that one part of its membership fees would go to the running of the federation and nominating some of its members to represent the French association within EFACIS. SOFAIR has been able to play that role thanks to a long history of interconnections between France and Ireland, but this has also been the case for other equally important national associations which have been supporting EFACIS from the start, such as the Spanish ADAI, the Nordic Irish Studies Network, or the Italian Group of Irish Studies. All of them have contributed to the development of EFACIS thanks to their specific activities, through their journals, academic networks, scholarships, summer schools, etc., which they have opened up to scholars from across Europe. Conversely, the inclusion of a national association into a larger European network, such as EFACIS, has contributed to strengthen local positions regarding local authorities and to enhance the reputation of Irish studies locally, at a time when governing bodies attach great value to international networking and interconnections. This institutional benefit should not, however, overshadow the more genuine attraction for researchers who, thanks to EFACIS, are offered the possibility to expand their audience beyond the limits of their national frontiers, to compare their findings with their peers, and to confront their ideas and interests with a much larger number of scholars from other parts of the continent. EFACIS also offers new possibilities to take part to innovative, creative activities besides the traditional organization of conferences or publications, such as the Translation Project, the Podcast Project, or the Irish Studies Itinerary just mentioned. SOFAIR, for instance, will follow up the model of the German Irish Studies Itinerary and of the Italian one by planning its own French Irish Studies Itinerary, for which will apply to the Emigrant Support Program on the topic of borders. As the current chairperson of SOFAIR, I keep reminding our members of the importance of our affiliation to EFACIS, either on a personal, individual level, or for the sake of the association itself, because of course, union makes strength, l'union fait la force. And now I hand on the floor to my colleague, Marguérite, Corporaal from the Netherlands.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Sylvie. In her praise for the recently launched 100th volume of the Peter Lang series Reimagining Ireland, Anne Fogarty emphasized the significance of what she called multidisciplinary for future engagement. Now, I personally could not agree more with that direction she was sort of fleshing out. And then I think it's a very important new direction for Irish studies at the moment, next to, I think, the transnational orientation that has already become, well, very much set and established. It's, however, a very challenging thing to achieve. I think we all realize that there are these debates going on in the humanities about how to achieve interdisciplinary perspectives within one single research network or project. And I think the problem with Irish studies, as in all disciplines, is we are usually trained according to a certain discipline, because this is how in Europe the academic system often works. And if we also look at Irish studies in Europe, what I always notice is that Irish studies on the European continent, and I'm looking at many of my colleagues here sitting also in this group, and also at myself, is very strongly focused on literature and theatre. But if you go across the channel and if you look at what colleagues are doing in Ireland, in United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, but also across the globe, for example, in America and Canada, we actually see many different disciplinary perspectives represented as well. We can think of geography, historiography, demography, archaeology, museological practices, amongst others. Well, this actually is how the academic system at present works. The added value of a transdisciplinary involvement in Irish studies is, in my view, unquestionable. If we look at the current international funding schemes, and if I look at the European situation, you can think of Horizon Europe, that's recently being launched again, but also at the many schemes that are funded by national funding organizations. What is increasingly required is an innovative combination of disciplinary vantage points that are sort of complementary and that enable researchers to actually deal with complex societally relevant issues. You can think actually of disasters and pandemics, right? Basically very much at the forefront of our thoughts today. But you can also think of issues like migration and integration, in and exclusion, emancipation, minority languages, environmental concerns, and heritage making. And I believe that it's really through collaboration and dialogues that we can actually achieve that. But what we need for this is sometimes a platform like EFACIS in order to be able to realize this, right? And I think EFACIS is already playing a very important role here in many respects. First of all, if we think of the conferences, I think EFACIS has become more conscious over the years, especially over the last years, of making the conferences a platform where people from many different disciplinary backgrounds can encounter, where they can actually exchange ideas and methodologies. I also recall we had a very fruitful discussion during the EFACIS conference in Ljubljana, which is already quite a few years back, where actually there was an open discussion during the AGM about, well, how can we increase this sense of interdisciplinarity? How can we make EFACIS very inclusive of what all the scholars in Europe are doing? And as was already mentioned by Katharina, I think, and by others as well, we are currently facing this issue of Brexit, a change in Europe, changing European borders. This is actually where we should reach out to one another even more, and I think EFACIS helps us with that. Briefly, final statement. We have the Irish itinerary. Katharina was already mentioning that. It's a fantastic project. In Nijmegen, we had the chance to welcome various authors, but also, and I'd like to emphasize that too, we had director Lenny Abramson, when he was not that famous yet, coming to Nijmegen, as well as the artist Rita Duffy. And I think it makes clear that if we think of the cultural output of EFACIS, it's not just about literature, right? It's also about people working in other kinds of disciplines like film, for example. and the visual arts. And the itinerary podcast that Katharina was mentioning could be, I think, an excellent additional opportunity to sort of foreground that interdisciplinarity that EFACIS puts on the agenda. And actually, we have some interesting podcasts that were made with writers, but I can imagine the podcast will extend to other forms of artists or people working maybe in museums or doing other interesting projects in society as well. And we can really sort of broaden the perspectives here. Katharina was also mentioning the Irish Studies podcast. Well, obviously, this could be a very important platform also where you invite scholars to contribute from the many different disciplines. And finally, the translation projects that Katharina was mentioning, like Astriou, it's for one thing, it's a fantastic opportunity for students to engage in translating Irish literature. It makes Irish literature or Irish text very, say, multilingual, because she asked people to translate in many different languages. I think that's the additional transnational aspect. But above all, you can also imagine that people who work in linguistics or translation studies are very much attracted to these kind of initiatives. And we can actually draw them into the EFACIS network in order to build on that sort of, I think, important but difficult ambition of creating an interdisciplinary Irish studies in Europe and beyond. And I'd now like to pass on to my colleague Radvan Markus.
Thank you very much, Marguérite. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm going to talk briefly about the academic dimension of the organization and the events that we organize or facilitate. While many activities of EFACIS strive to reach out to the wider audience and promote Irish culture among the educated public, activities such as the Irish itinerary, one should not forget that the members of the organizations are scholars whose main activity, along with teaching, is actually research, and EFACIS does not forget that. And it helps these academics to share their research among themselves and to stay in touch with what is happening in the field. And I think this is especially important in the case of scholars outside of the established national organizations and Irish Studies centers who would otherwise be in danger of working in isolation. And so there are various academic events that EFACIS organizes in order to facilitate this networking. First of all, there is the biannual EFACIS conference. So far, 12 of these events have been held since 1998 in various European cities, from Palermo to Göteborg and from Ljubljana to Galway, so across the continent. We are also very much aware of the fact that networking is especially important for scholars at an early stage of their careers. And for this purpose, EFACIS facilitates 2 events that again take place on a biannual basis, taking turns. One of them is the PhD seminar in Leuven, and the other the postgraduate conference in Prague. And I'll be happy to fill in the details on these events later if there's opportunity. I feel confident enough to argue that various centers for Irish studies on the European continent have made significant contributions to the field over the year, even shaping its direction in various ways. Just to give you a few random examples of the geographical distribution and the thematic range of these, the wonderful research on the Irish famine and the Dublin Gate Theatre, organized by Marguérite and the University of Nijmegen, the activities around the Walter Macken archive at the University of Wuppertal, the connections between Irish and disability studies, recently established at the University of Łódź in Poland, the exciting International Flann O'Brien Society with a journal and biannual conference based at the University of Vienna, and many, many more. Our center in Prague focuses largely on Irish theatre and on literature in the Irish language. which is another field where I really believe that the larger European perspective is of enormous importance. And it's clear that the networks provided by EFACIS have played a crucial role in all these cases by bringing scholars together and also by helping them to get financial support for their activities. Thank you very much. And I'd like to pass the virtual microphone on to Seán Crosson.
Gur míle maithid Radvan, díomh a cháirde go léir. Is mór an honour domsa a bheith páirteach sa góra seachanacht. Tá anmhaíocht de Darragh, de Regina, de Aoife agus de gach duine páirteach sa Global Irish Diaspora Congresses ucht an deis ionintach seo thuirtstún cainslib agus le slua chomór seo tá níos beagnach seascadíní an seachanacht so tá sin arás ar fad. As Aoife indicated at the beginning, my name is Seán Crosson. I'm the general editor of the Review of Irish Studies in Europe, or RISE. This is EFACIS online peer-reviewed publication, peer-reviewed multidisciplinary online journal, and I'm also serious co-editor of Irish Studies in Europe, or ISE, which is EFACIS peer-reviewed publication series. And EFACIS publications began with Irish Studies in Europe in the mid-2000s, and we should acknowledge the huge legacy of our former publications lead and much missed dear friend, Professor Werner Huber, who I know many people here will know, and like myself, who was still greatly missed, sadly passed in 2016, but whose vision it was initially to begin an EFACIS publication series. And we draw inspiration in the publications we continue to produce from Werner's focus, vision, commitment, and commitment to the highest standards in our publications. We're also, of course, informed by EFACIS' commitment to serve and develop our members and Irish studies more broadly as a research, as an interdisciplinary research area. The series Irish Studies in Europe, firstly, our ISE, aims to publish new research from within the humanities and social sciences on all aspects of history, society, and culture of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Irish diaspora. And the program of this series in particular is a deliberate reflection of the objectives of EFACIS. The European dimension suggested by the series title is an indication of a prioritized, though by no means exclusive, concentration on the European perspectives on Irish studies. And we've already heard in the roundtable tonight the importance of those perspectives on research, and that this has been very much evident, I think, in the various publications that have emerged within the Irish Studies in Europe series to date. I might just share my screen here so I can just show you, given the limitations on time. I'm just going to share this. Hopefully you can all see this, but you can find this on the EFACIS website, efacis.eu, and we have our Irish Studies in Europe, all of our past volumes. We've published to date 9 volumes within the series. The most recent volume is the first monograph in the series, which was a monograph of Daniel Becker looking at national history and limited remembrance in contemporary Irish poetry. And we've our forthcoming volume, volume 10, with the title Stage Irish, will include more extended chapters from papers that were delivered at the EFACIS conference in Ljubljana, which Marguérite referred to there in 2019. And that collection, which is forthcoming later this year, is edited by Paul Fagan, Tamara Radek, and Dieter Fuchs. And just finally on ISE, if you wish to submit a proposal for ISE, you can do so through on the website. You'll find a proposal form. I'm sorry, I can't seem to open it here now, but it's available under publications on our website. I'm just going to move on quickly, given the time issues, if I can, to our journal, Irish Studies, Review of Irish Studies in Europe. And in 2016, this was established, Review of Irish Studies in Europe, or RISE, initially under the general editorship of Professor Seán and Murphy, whose initial vision and dedication to the journal we're also grateful to. RISE is dedicated to the publication of new and innovative research within and between the broad range of disciplines and areas engaged with Irish studies. And we've heard Marguérite refer to some of those many, many areas that are relevant in Irish studies, not just literature, but also, of course, history, film and visual culture, politics, translation studies, music studies, social sciences more broadly. In the RISE, we publish both themed multidisciplinary issues and non-themed issues with a more interdisciplinary research work. And again, I'm just going to quickly share this with you before I finishing up. Sorry, I'll share you just so you can have a look at this yourselves and perhaps visit it in your own time. So this is our website, the RISE website. And you can find back issues, of which there are 6 back issues within the series to date. And we have a new issue forthcoming, which will be launched in a few weeks on June the 17th at 6 p.m. Irish time, 7 p.m. CET. And whatever time, wherever part of the world you are in, I see from the chat that we've people here from all parts of the world. But this will be launched, as I say, on the 17th at 7 p.m. CET. It's a themed issue entitled Staging Europe at the Gate Theatre, edited by Siobhan O'Gorman, Elaine Sisson, and Einar Walsh. And further information on that launch will be circulated in due course. Just to mention very quickly, we have 2 forthcoming issues, one in winter 2021, a themed issue on Maeve McGuckian, edited by Dr. Daniela Theanova, and in spring 2022, we'll have a themed issue on Irish sexual liberation and its literature, edited by Dr. Laura Sadora and Dr. Robert Brassu. And we do, of course, welcome submissions and proposals for themed issues and direct submissions for future non-themed issues, which can be sent to me at rise@ephasis.eu. And that's me. Go to Mila Mahagi. I think it's Arash Gutcha, Gara.
Gurmil Maigat, Seán, August, Gurmil Maigat, Galera, Karja. That was superb. And I'm so delighted to see the breadth and depth of Irish studies, which you practice every day, being presented to our truly global audience. We have scholars here from South America, South Africa, North America, and beyond. So again, that really speaks to the diversity of the EFACIS experience. And Aoife and I, in the next few minutes, will try and draw out some of those topics and some of those issues which you very generously raised. I mean, the first question, which I thought was pertinent, and I suppose, Katharina, I would begin with you, as you kind of raised this issue most prominently, is this balance of culture, research, and teaching, which it strikes me is so integral to what you do as an association, but also as individuals. Rereading your strategic report for 2019 and 20, I was struck by the sheer volume of work which you do as scholars in Europe, very often in isolation, either geographically or in terms of disciplinarity. So, Katharina, can you speak to how you can balance the culture, research, and teaching of Irish studies in the EFACIS region?
Yes, I'm delighted to do so. I mean, of course, much of what we do is really thanks to initiatives and the great enthusiasm of individual scholars. We must never forget that. It's very often professors and younger scholars in universities where they are very often just a lonely representative of Irish studies or a team, and they go extra lengths really to not just do their own research and teach, but to also organize events. And this is where I think EFACIS really profits a lot from those individual endeavors, and where our members can also, of course, profit from EFACIS, because now Culture Ireland and also the Department of Foreign Affairs does support us financially, we must say. So we can finance, for example, the Irish itinerary, partly at least, so that the travel expenses are covered. So this is an incentive also for members to become part of the team, part of the larger community. And what they offer is really simply a lot of work that they put into this. And as you said, what we all really strive for is this integration of culture and research and teaching. And I mean, you can probably imagine that if an artist or an author comes to visit for a reading, that's a great experience for students, but we also open these events up for the larger public. And very often those individuals, directors, musicians also, and authors are invited on the basis of our scholars' own research activities, right? So that this goes hand in hand. I think, and again, we owe this to what we've learned during COVID-19. The Irish Itinerary podcast, in a way, represents this idea really well, or gives it yet another aspect. I just post the link here so for you to look it up, because here we really have European scholars with their perspectives, also very often very clearly regionalized perspectives and research perspectives, interviewing contemporary authors and artists. So that I think it's not just yet another podcast. Everyone does podcasts, and of course we also did podcasts, but there is this special European emphasis feel to it. And I'm proud to say, when I looked it up today, I already knew that we've been downloaded from all continents, but today we've reached 48 different countries from which this podcast has been downloaded. So we've really moved beyond Europe with spreading Irish culture, contemporary culture, but also I think, and that's important for us with the podcast, our research that we find locally. I could go on. I really would like to mention also Kaleidoscope, a project run by Hedwig Schwall and Fogarty and Joachim Fischer. The second part, Kaleidoscope 2, which has the subtitle Europe in Ireland, where in a way we initiate authors writing. So here we ask authors to produce original work on the topic of Europe in Ireland. You can just read the wonderful contributions and very timely contributions on our website. I hope I've partly at least answered your question, and I don't want to take up all the time here, even though I could go on, but I'm sure there'll be more to say a bit later on.
Thank you, Katharina. I jump in at this point. I suppose to pick up on you mentioned the regional perspectives of your members and of the various associations who have joined the EFACIS network. And I wonder if some of the panel could speak to that in a little bit more detail. I think Sylvie touched on this earlier, and Radvan also. Perhaps some of the challenges that are posed by working with individuals and associations in different locations and across different disciplines.
As far as interdisciplinary is concerned, we are lucky enough in SOFAIR that people do work across disciplines from the start. SOFAIR has gathered scholars working either in history or sociology, and this is reflected as well in the journal Études Irlandaises. I'm not sure, it's not difficult for us, I mean, for the SOFAIR to be a part of a larger organization because, because we have everything to gain from that connection, and but we start from a solid ground, of course, because in France we are fortunate enough to have again a long-standing history of Irish studies, we may say, and to answer Darragh's previous question about the connection between culture, education, and research, for example. In fact, there are a good number of French universities where Irish studies is taught as a subject, and we do produce PhDs, but we also have quite a developed cultural aspect as well. We have the Centre Culturel Irlandais, for example, in Paris, who does an excellent job. but it's true as well that EFACIS is also benefits individual scholars as well who can feel isolated in their own part of the continent, and who perhaps do not benefit from the infrastructures that we have in more established societies like the SOFAIR, or in Spain, or in Italy, where again there is a long tradition, and which is due again to the history of the countries as well sometimes. So I'm thinking of scholars coming from smaller countries, or from central or eastern parts of Europe as well, who have been able to join. And I think those can benefit greatly from this association. And I think for them, it's also a stepping stone in their at home it gives them a good argument to develop Irish studies at home, to be part of a larger network. If this answers your question again.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Sylvie. And I wonder, Radvan, if you'd like to come in on that as well, because you mentioned briefly the various Irish Studies centres across Europe who have joined the EFACIS network, and obviously reaping huge benefits from that networking and just transdisciplinary research.
Definitely so. I really feel, partly thanks to EFACIS, that even if you are based in, let's say, Central Europe, where Irish studies doesn't have that much tradition, one doesn't feel isolated, and one feels that Irish studies is very much an international discipline. And I could feel it from the very start when I embarked on a PhD. I think that the attention EFACIS devotes to early career scholars is of crucial importance. The PhD seminar in Leuven, for example, where the PhD candidates actually get some feedback from established scholars. During the conference in Prague, they are invited to give feedback to each other. So there is communication among people from various parts of Europe, and one definitely doesn't feel isolated at all. And perhaps one thing that I'd like to add is also the language dimension to all this, because Europe is very much a multilingual space. We're very much aware of that in EFACIS as a part of the EFACIS activities. We have various translation projects focusing on authors, Irish authors, both in English and in Irish. The most recent project being on Enright. And I think there is no better way how to engage with an author than to translate him or her into your language. So it's a great way how to integrate research and culture, as Kathy mentioned.
Thanks, Radvan. And I know you've certainly done that yourself with your own translations of Martin O'Kine's work, which are to be hugely praised for bringing his work to new audiences.
Good, Margaret. Thank you. It's not only me. There are many other translators. The last of the translation projects in which EFACIS was involved in was Ashtrue, collection of Irish language texts. It was mainly organized by National University of Ireland, Galway, and I think it was of tremendous importance in order to get the Irish language out of this exclusive connection to English in which it is often perceived.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Radvan. That's absolutely fascinating. And I think it actually moves us on very nicely to the next area of discussion, which builds on this idea of languages, you know, multilingualism and so on. Seán, if I could come to you next, as it pertains to publications, and I mean, it's so impressive what EFACIS does in terms of, you know, RICE and ICE, and the prolific nature of scholarship in, you know, the EFACIS region is really outstanding. But I suppose something which speaks to potentially other Irish studies communities, many of whose members are in attendance this evening, is the publication of, you know, journals, special issues, special editions. I just wonder, could you outline in a bit more detail maybe some of the challenges, the hands-on challenges as editor of publishing those publications in terms of looking for contributors, working across borders, but also specifically languages. I was really struck by Irish University Review did a series on Irish studies in global context a number of years ago, and Andrew Fitzsimmons wrote on Irish studies in Japan, and he talked about the importance of, yes, publishing in English to make your work as visible as possible, but also to maintain the integrity and the authenticity of the native language in which people write, or the ideas in which they write, in this case, Japan. And I presume in Europe, given the diversity of languages in which people are native speakers, there are potential challenges there as an editor.
Yeah, well, it is a chat. I mean, any editor, anybody who's involved in editing a publication will know that it is a very challenging undertaking. I'm fortunate that I have a very supportive editorial board, including both Sylvie and Kathy, who are both here with me today. And we also have Daniela, who's editing the Maeve McGee issue that I mentioned. We have Jules Augustine, and these have been, and Elke Docker, who's also on the EFACIS board. So this team has been really, really critical to have that support network, international support network as well, to support the work that I do as general editor of RISE, and then as serious co-editor along with Kathy and Hedvig Schwal, who you already have heard. And Hedvig has been a hugely important figure in EFACIS from the very beginning. EFACIS, she's like almost a mother figure for all of us in EFACIS, and she's the project lead at this point. She's been the visionary behind so many of the projects in EFACIS, and we all owe her a huge debt. I think she's here actually. Is she in the room? I hope she is. But anyway, so in terms of how we approach publications, and as you know, we've the two publications to date. The ISE, or Irish Studies in Europe, has emerged primarily further to conferences that we've hosted. Now, not all of the issues, but most of the issues have come out of that context. And the editing process then has been led mostly by the people who were leading the conference. So for example, I edited volume 6 because I hosted the EFACIS conference in 2013 in Galway. So myself and actually Werner co-edited with me, which was a huge privilege to work with Werner Huber on that issue. And that process, one of the things that we did in Irish Studies in Europe, and which we've continued to do with Review of Irish Studies in Europe journal, is that we accept submissions in both Irish and in English. But those that are published in Irish, and we've had Irish language essays within Irish Studies in Europe series, including in the volume I co-edited, they're accompanied by a short summary for the benefit of the majority of our readers who may not have Irish language at a level sufficient to read in Irish. We don't, like, the main language is English for our publications, of necessity, I suppose, in terms of, well, that's the main language that people engaged with Irish studies are engaging with Irish studies in and through in terms of their own publications. But we're very, I suppose, cognizant of the variety of languages from which people are coming in submitting their work. But I think that that's often a strength of the submissions we get, which some of it may be engaged with that multilingual context from which they're emerging. And that can bring some really, I think, interesting perspectives on Irish literature, both in Irish, in English language and in the Irish languages. I'm sure Radvan has already alluded to that, because they're coming from quite distinct and different linguistic backgrounds. I'm sorry, I hope that gives you some sense of how we're approaching it.
Certainly, and I think you struck the right tone there in terms of advantages. You know, the kind of facing outwards with that kind of optimism is really kind of encouraging, and I think that can also be very instructive to colleagues across the world who, you know, work in multilingual contexts, whether it's within universities or in countries where there are two languages which are recognized as official, for example. I think there are interesting parallels and lessons to be drawn from that. So that's really, really helpful. Marguérite, I might come to you to build on that. And I was really struck by the term you used of vantage points as it related to multidisciplinarity, especially in the EFACIS region. And again, that strikes me potentially as a strength. I know that there are difficulties there, absolutely. But as a strength, could you speak to the strengths of working, you know, in terms of maybe building networks with colleagues in archaeology, you know, post-colonial studies and so on, and your own personal experiences in that respect?
Sure, yeah, I'm very glad to say something about that. And maybe I can bring in two important networks that I sort of established in Nijmegen, or from Nijmegen, and that enabled me to work with, with other Irish studies scholars who were based in Finland, for example, in Northern Ireland, in the Czech Republic. One of them was the International Network of Irish Famine Studies. And actually we got funding from the Dutch Research Council and WO for it for a period of 3 years. So it was actually running from, what was it again? I think 2016 to 2019. And what was really good about it was I was starting this network from very much being a scholar of literature, literary theory, knowing a little bit about cultural analysis and cultural studies. But it enabled me actually to, you could actually say, yeah, the arena of the interdisciplinary global arena of Irish studies enabled me to work with your colleague, for example, Darragh, Peter Gray, but also with Andrew Newby, who is an historian and has a very broad European perspective and is working on both Finland and Ireland in relation to famines. And then what we had was we organized from the platform a series of meetings, which all had a different kind of theme, but which were actually open to people who work from, I could say, many different fields. So we had one meeting about migration, also to hang on, sort of link up to this idea of the global Irish community. And we had one actually about issues of social class. And we organized a meeting in Maynooth, at the time hosted by Una Frawley, which had a lot to do with the visual and material cultures of the famine. And the good thing of all these meetings was that we got people who actually work with material objects like lace making, or very important objects that were used in the Catholic Church during the famine, for example, or with graphic novels, or actually people doing like social economic perspectives on the famine, right? And how did the banks work at the time? People doing work on the workhouses. Well, if you combine that in a project like this, what you get is you really start thinking out of the box, and you realize that there's actually more connections, for example, between a certain economic basis or economic conditions in a society and the kind of artworks that are coming from it. And that if you think in terms of politics resonates sometimes even in films, like a recent production like Black 47, right? That we can actually be thinking about. And there's another Irish spoken film that was never released, I think, in many European countries due to COVID, but Darragh, Monster. We actually see that language issues are playing an important role here as well, right? Why are so many of these productions also resorting to Irish? Why is that so important? And I think that helped me even to work further from that specific network to establish another big project where we now at the moment are working on teaching and heritage of comparative European famines, where the Irish famine is having a very important place, where we have historians on board as part of the research team, but also literary scholars and people coming from cultural studies, and where we have people on the advisory board who also come from fruit studies and environmental studies, for example, right? And we never thought that this is something we could realize. And the other network is the Gay Theatre Research Network, and Radvan, who is also here in the Roundtable, was one of my colleagues on the network, and we worked together a lot. And that seems like a more narrowed down version at first glance, right? You just look at the Dublin Gay Theatre. But the good thing was we got people who looked at languages, minority languages. We had people involved from music. We had people involved who were working on stage design, for example. And what you get is so many different perspectives that the publications that came out of such a network, I think, again, paving the way for a bigger project in the making that we're now thinking about as colleagues, where we involve more European countries, where as scholars in Irish studies, we can also think of working together with people working on Scandinavian or German theatre, for example. But also where, we can really start to think of how, a bigger question like, how does theatre work in processes of social emancipation or in relation to current crises, for example, like the refugee crisis. These are things that can enable you to answer, which actually gives you a sense of satisfaction, because it makes Irish studies really matter to a lot of the important societal issues that even the media are reporting up on regularly. And you can contribute your thoughts, and you can actually do so from the field of Irish studies. But you have all these different perspectives next to one another, which actually, because these are often such complicated issues, gives you better insights into such questions. And I think that is as a real value. That's also how Radvan was mentioning, that you don't feel isolated due to basically a network like EFACIS. This is also where we meet each other, where Radvan and I also met each other. And this is also how you can start collaborating. And I think that's really important.
That's so fascinating, Marguérite. And I was very interested in the way you talked about almost like the modes of Irish studies, that you're speaking of theatre in particular, which, rereading again some of our colleagues in Brazil who speak of theatre and performance and the visual arts as being so essential to understanding Irish studies and communicating Irish studies to diverse audiences there. So again, your project, your networks really do have a global reach. Aoife, you have a follow-up question perhaps?
I did. Marguérite, I think there were really enlightening examples of how a network can build from probably initially quite a small group of scholars collaborating and spreading then, as you said, not just throughout the field of Irish studies, but actually more broadly onto broader European societal issues. I wonder if you and some of our other panelists could also speak a little bit more about, beyond, I suppose, we've seen fantastic examples of the collaboration among researchers and particularly early career researchers. But another aspect that we wanted to raise with the association tonight is how to engage the next generation of scholars. So just if you could speak to perhaps some projects or initiatives that EFACIS is involved in to attract postgraduate students and possibly even undergraduate.
I mean, again, most of our projects are also integrated into teaching activities at the universities. Mm-hmm. Of course, I've already mentioned the traditional Irish itinerary. And for example, for my Wuppertal students, the reading that they went to, for example, with Marina Carr 2 years ago, that for many of them, that is the very first reading they are attending. They don't know what such a thing is. So that's very often their first encounter with such cultural events, and they are blown away and so fascinated that some of them have then signed up for the next reading and asked, could I do an interview for my little radio show with the author? And of course, the author, it was Claire Kilroy at the time, was delighted. So that's how this project engages students, BA students even, and master students definitely. And now we've come up recently with this new project that we've called the Irish Studies Itinerary. And we've been able to convince the Department of Foreign Affairs that it's worth funding also more research-related activities. That's always been the difficulty. Culture Ireland was happy to fund cultural events, but it's always difficult to get money for research from national institutions. And now with the Irish Studies Itinerary, we have scholars from the EFACIS network traveling across one nation and giving lectures on a certain topic. So we've started with what we've now called the German Irish Studies itinerary, which has the topic of great Irish novels of the 21st century. So of course we had to give this a title which is also attractive to the Department of Foreign Affairs, right? So news about novels will be spread, but we have established scholars going on those tours and will also publish a volume of collected articles that come out of that. And as somebody has mentioned earlier, Loredana, who's also present here with us from Italy, they've put in the next bid for the Italian Irish Studies itinerary, which we hope to get launched next year. I know that in Spain, there are ongoing activities, and in France to get something going. Also in the new centers that are emerging in the Balkan area, this is one of their main, one of the projects with which they think they can really get started to establish a network. And this is a way of, I mean, my BA students have to attend the lectures of all the scholars who come to Wuppertal to gain credit points, and they will have to read the books that are introduced. But again, I mean, that's also quite a challenge for the scholars, right, who first address a student audience, but then we also expect that they turn this into a really well-researched and interesting scholarly article later on. But that's how we try to really integrate that and again connect different universities and centers.
That sounds fantastic, Katharina. Thanks for outlining that. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of those, if you like, breakout activities, like having an author come to visit, or, you know, having literary readings or film screenings as part of a conference or seminar. Another aspect that I know we've tried to engage in quite a lot at UCD is to record all those guest lectures and seminars, which then, not only for those who can't attend on the night, but actually then to build up a body of podcasts and recordings for future students. And they very often, I'm sure you've all seen that word, they very often are delighted to be able to listen to a podcast of a guest lecture as well as, you know, engage with the assigned reading. So I think that's another way definitely to begin engaging scholars right from undergraduate level and beyond. So Darragh,
Thanks, Aoife. I really like to build on what Katharina has just outlined in such an inspiring way. And that's also been echoed in our comments. Keep an eye on the chat, by the way, people using the term inspiring for many of our panelists. So we're so grateful for the feedback. We are coming to the international Q&A section very shortly, so do have your questions prepared. But again, one of the aspects of this series is to try and offer solutions to the many challenges which we face across the world. And I hope some of our colleagues who are listening will be able to offer those in the Q&A. But one of the questions I had, which builds on what Katharina was speaking to, but this is to the general panel, is about resources and access to resources. I suppose in a way we are privileged on the island of Ireland to have access through our libraries at institutional level to Irish studies sources. It's just a given in most of our universities that we have access to them. And presumably, especially if you're not operating out of an established Irish studies center in Europe or in Egypt or anywhere else, that there are difficulties in accessing those sources for yourselves, for your students. So I wonder, could you speak a little bit about that, how you could potentially circumvent those asymmetries or inequalities in access to sources? And also, if some of you would like to speak about funding, how can we as an Irish Studies community globally support you in Europe in terms of access to funding? Are there transnational projects that we can cooperate with? Are there institutions internationally? I know Marguérite mentioned Horizon, that we can collaborate with you to build on these really superb initiatives which you've already been developing. So two aspects to whoever wants to take them.
Should I say something about the funding bit, if that's fine? If we talk about the kind of aid that we probably need is, Horizon Europe is really like a big program, and it's very hard to get funding from a program like that. There are also smaller possibilities sometimes, like collaborations that come from the AHRC in Britain or from the Irish Research Council. I think what helps a lot is bringing people together and matchmaking, if I may use a very Irish way of looking at things. But sometimes there's a group of scholars who has really good ideas. And it's really hard to find maybe people who work in a sort of complementary field or in a complementary disciplinary field. That together would be like a sort of dream combination for basically an application. What would really help, and I think EFACIS can already play a role in that, but also your organization is making sure that the connections are there, that you maybe open something like a digital platform where people can do matchmaking. Now we've discovered some of the benefits of Zoom, right, apart from the downsides of it, to have things like meeting groups where people can sort of go together, where they can do sort of a speed dating with other people who are looking for project partners. I think that could be very useful, because in some ways we know how to find the people we would like to work with, but there are also the unexpected connections you can make. And yeah, I think that's invaluable, if I'm honest.
Yes, and I mean, of course, collaboration is always extremely welcome and also helps with funding activities. I mean, within EFACIS, as I've already mentioned, we have been fairly successful with the immigration support program. They have now also, thanks to Andre Pilney's intervention from ISIL, the two of us together had a meeting with the Department of Foreign Affairs and convinced them that it's worth supporting Irish studies specifically. And they've now actually launched a new program within the immigrant support program called Irish Studies Program, so that we can, through our embassies, apply for funding. Of course, no, but not everyone gets that. And I think it's also, they've made it very clear that what is important is a networking effect, which also goes beyond one region, or preferably even beyond one nation. So whenever we have a project where scholars from many different nations, also from beyond Europe, are involved, that has, of course, much better chances. So we're always happy for support from that. And also, of course, if you could sometimes consider in all those scholarships where scholars are invited to come for a fellowship to work in an archive or at a certain institution, also think of the fact that continental Europeans can bring this very important external perspective to Irish studies. That would, of course, be also helpful and very welcome. But I know that that's what many of our partners already do, but that's, of course, highly appreciated.
I think, thanks, Katharina. And I think Marguérite has coined maybe one of the catchphrases of tonight's session, which would be speed dating for research partners. I think that's a fantastic idea, and certainly something, as you said, that can be facilitated more easily now that we are all becoming more familiar with these digital platforms. I think, Darragh, that's probably bringing our panel discussion to a close, and that we'll move on to the Q&A portion now, as I know the time is moving on and some of you are on much later time zones, and for others I know it's in the middle of the day and you're probably keen to go and have some lunch.
That's exactly right. We're conscious of the world time zones in which we are speaking. So if you do have a question or comment, you can raise your hand and we'll come to you. We can see it in the participants section. And I know there's been a number of comments have been coming through from our attendees. So do raise your hand, your digital hand, as they say, and we'll come to you in terms of a question. And this is an opportunity to, again, speak to our studies colleagues, even to speak about your own research. If you find that there are potential collaborative opportunities, synchronicities you want to address or raise, then certainly this is an opportunity to do so. Certainly plenty of food for thought. And again, I suppose to your point, this idea of diaspora very often has been separated, certainly in history, which is my area of specialism. There have been two separate strands of historiography, island history and diaspora history. So potentially Irish studies is one way or one channel by which we might be able to you know, match or bind those two stories or those histories. Seán, I think, wanted to come in on that point.
I mean, I'm aware the British Association of Irish Studies do a lot of great work in reaching out to the diaspora across the UK. I'm not sure, Caroline McGuinness was the chair. I'm not sure if she still is the chair, but I'd recommend, you know, connecting with them. I know they've really focused on trying to engage with the community, the diasporic community, as well as not just the academic community, but they've kind of got a dual focus in that respect. And they have meetings and groups that liaise with people in the diaspora to respond to the type of questions and issues that you're raising here as well.
Katharina would like to come in also.
Maybe just very briefly to add again the continental European perspective. It just came to my mind that many of us, for example, Marisol Morales-Legrand, or you, Sylvie, or I myself work on the historical novel and contemporary historical novel. And through that, I mean, reading Sebastian Barry or Emma Donohue's historical fiction, we do speak about those topics again in research and in teaching.
There has been a lot of rewriting of Irish history, either coming from Ireland itself or from abroad. But it's true that an outsider point of view is always, that's what we were saying earlier on, that an outsider point of view is always perhaps more objective and can bring something different.
Fascinating. And I think that's, there are many ways potentially you can follow up in terms of the Irish Studies avenues which have been suggested, and keep an eye on the chat where people are posting links to their Irish Studies centres, communities, which again allows you to follow up, especially in this digital age.
That's where I'd say, how do we lure them into our network? I mean, that is, of course, one of the biggest challenges, I'd say. And Marguérite, of course, has shown us one of the golden ways how to deal with these problems and that, or this challenge, and that's via topics that would be interesting for those who are already within EFACIS and who are more interested in or just based in English literary departments or history departments proper, right? Of course, what I would imagine would be just terrific if you could put together such a panel and ask them to send in abstracts for our next conference. We would be absolutely delighted and make the contact, right? But this is very often where it is difficult for us who, I mean, as a non-Anglophone professor of English doing Irish studies, you have a lot on your plate already, right? You usually are somehow in a center at your own university because you have to collaborate with your colleagues as well. You teach English, you teach Irish. So we'd love to branch out, and some of us do more or less successfully, but very often there's just not the space and time to make the contact and to meet. And of course, I can just say, please come to our conferences. And we would love to start new networks that collaborate interdisciplinarily.
Just on that, just to add to what Kathy has said, David, and to give us a little bit of info about the publication side as well. We have hosted panels, economic panels. We had one at our 2013 conference in Galway that led to a number of publications in the in the issue of Irish Studies in Europe towards 2016, which emerged from that. And Professor Alan Ahern, the economist based in NUI Galway, has written quite a bit around the crash post-2008, made a contribution in that. And he's also, by the way, honoured the advisory board for the Review of Irish Studies in Europe journal, and he advises on bringing in. One of the challenges there, in addition to what Kathy has identified, is often, as you know, economists, I suppose across in many disciplines, they tend to speak to people within their own disciplines, perhaps even more so in economics and in business, and they tend to gather and meet at events that are focused primarily at economics or at business. So it's more difficult to get them to come into our space. So it's helpful to have people like Professor Alan Ahern, who's in that space, to bring people in, to have a kind of wouldn't call him exactly gatekeeper, but a messenger, a in-between point that can bring in economists to engage with the topics that we're engaged with, because there's always really valuable insights to be gained from that interaction. Those what Marguérite again described, those speed date meetings, or those research interactions that we have across disciplines.
Maybe I can just give one example to sort of suggest what kind of route you could take, right? Because if we talk about, for example, famine research, right, which is part very much anchored in Irish studies, and David, I know you know a lot about the famine as well and about the famine diaspora. What is interesting, what we've also been doing with colleagues like Andrew Newby, who's also in this session, is we had a meeting in Helsinki many years ago, where actually people like Declan Curran were also talking about basically, well, the financing arranged by banking and the banking world, what was actually happening in banking. If we look at Ireland, if we look at England, right, during the famine, what kind of policies? It was a very interesting meeting because you can also at the same time talk about issues of relief, right? For relief also has a lot to do with funding, with economic systems. And then you can easily sort of make the connection to the media, which may not seem what you sort of expect at first sight. But a lot of these funding campaigns were actually organized by periodicals. They were sometimes very locally based. So I know of periodicals who did this in France, but also in the Netherlands, for example, who raised money and actually wanted to contribute to the Irish suffering from the famine. And if you have something like that, this is just one example. You can combine economic history, you can combine it with historiography, you can combine it with media studies, right? And here is where a wide range of possibilities open up, I think.
Thanks.
This is so exciting. Even just hearing a sample of voices of what's potentially in the future, or the futures, the plural as we like to use. I gather we have some comments, Aoife, or questions rather, coming in the comment section.
Yeah, so we have a question from Cóilín Parsons joining us from Washington. And Cóilín was, I think, very impressed by your examples, Marguérite, of the different research networks and clusters that you drew together. But he's asking, you know, is there scope to expand these collaborations to an even greater degree? For example, to underfunded universities in the Global South. Would you like to speak to that, Marguérite?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak about that. What I think is probably the difficulty that we're working with is that funding schemes are usually very locally or continentally based, right? I think we realize that. And the intercontinental would also be, I think, very important. But if we look at now, what we have is very much the national-based kind of funding organizations. Sometimes funding that becomes available through well, regional institutions that for example also have to do with heritage or things like that. What is important is that there are also less privileged countries in the world where equally important research is happening in Irish studies, but also in affiliated fields. And Cóilín, I think, really raised an important point that how can we sort of draw in, you could say, these more underprivileged countries in research networks and get the funding available. And I think if we think in terms of the funding bodies available at the moment, this is difficult. Where maybe there may be possibilities is thinking of specific organizations that have to do with food or access to food or human rights or political borders or migration. If they are willing to be, and I'm sorry, David, I'm going to use the word stakeholders, for example, on a certain funding bid, that may enable to create maybe funding resources that also make it possible for, you could say, a more globally justified and also a globally more interesting research consortia that we could sort of work with. And it's actually a difficult question you're asking, but this is sort of what comes to mind for myself. And maybe one of my colleagues can add up to this.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer, Marguérite, and I think certainly something worth exploring, as you said, not just for local funding, but international schemes as well. We have a question also from Owen McGee, just picking up on David's point about comparative histories. And I suppose he's commenting that few students of European political history over the years have addressed Ireland, with the exception of Jerome and Deville. And he's asking, is attracting more political history students in Europe? Is that the answer? Radvan is about to comment.
Yeah, just I'd like to say that I entirely agree. And these people are always welcome. As my colleagues mentioned, it's often the matter of attracting them to the network. I may mention, for example, in one of the volumes that came out of the PhD conferences, there were some wonderful comparative studies of Polish culture, politics, and Ireland, focusing mainly on Patrick Beers, and these were wonderful articles by one of our former students. So definitely, it's a good path to pursue.
Thank you, Radvan. We also have a very interesting comment in from Patrick O'Sullivan, who's asking if there is a need for really a more critical approach to what we term Irish studies, on the basis that Ireland can too often become the source of authenticity when the diasporic communities have their own culture and cultural projects which are also authentic.
I can say a few words about that. In fact, in France, we have decided recently to work on diaspora. We have set up a network of academics through our universities, this time funded by universities, called GIS. It means Groupement d'intérêt scientifique. And in fact, we have defined 2 areas of research over a certain number of years, limited to 4 years. And one branch is about human rights in Ireland, and the other is about diaspora. And one of our members, I think she's here tonight, Gronia O'Keefe, was able to write a report on the presence of Irish people, of people of Irish descent, the Irish diaspora in France. So yes, we have taken this as a subject of study. And the other branch, human rights, also shows that there are people in France, but I know elsewhere as well, who are interested in political science and in political life in general in Ireland and in the Irish diaspora as well. And I'm very glad to hear someone mention Jérôme and Deville, who was my colleague in Reims.
Thank you, Sylvie. And I think that actually your answer in a way takes us back to the previous question also. And I think that maybe one of these challenges around broadening the scope of how we define Irish studies is maybe the way in which we as scholars define ourselves. So that we're talking about attracting scholars to our networks, but I think that's something that we all need to be mindful of, particularly as things change in this post-COVID conference world, that we do apply for panels at conferences which may, at first seem outside of our own disciplines, and that we encourage colleagues to do likewise for our Irish Studies events. And obviously that leads on to publications also. I think, Darragh, we've been through most of the questions. We've a huge amount of comments and interaction in the chat as well. So thanks to all those who have posted links and opened up this conversation with our inaugural roundtable discussion.
Exactly, Aoife, it's been absolutely fascinating to get insights from around the world, and I hope our colleagues in the EFACIS network have taken on board some of the suggestions, but also inspired others, as I know you have, from your comments, from your experiences, and from your suggestions for future collaboration. research speed dating, I think, is the go-to term to come out of this discussion. Before we kind of conclude this evening's proceedings, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Professor Regina Chollatáin, just to say a few words in thanks and perhaps offer her own reflections on this evening's proceedings, and then we'll conclude. Regina.
Okay, Darragh. I don't want to keep anybody any longer. I think it's been a very enthusiastic, very invigorating conversation here tonight. And I think more importantly than anything, the main reason for this was exactly what Darragh had in mind, was to bring a round table where we would have a variety of thoughts, a variety of scholarship, and a variety of individual inputs into what Irish studies really involves. To me, I mean, I think, you know, coining the phrase on the speed dating yet again, but I think also maybe being a little bit of an older generation, the research matchmaking also rang true to me, I have to say. And coming from a very traditional Donegal background, I have to say that would, that also, I thought there were some very lovely ways of looking at this. I think you've been very realistic as well in the discussion tonight, because there are limits to what can be done. But I think one of the I suppose as an Irish language scholar myself, I'm very enthusiastic about the translation projects, and particularly the current one that Hedvig and all of your colleagues are heading on an Enright. One thing that really maybe didn't come up as much here tonight, which I would feel is important, is the context of fellowships and Erasmus Plus exchanges. I think these are crucial to what we're doing. And I think we all need to really capitalise on those shorter visits to partner institutions to do the speed dating or whatever it is, but to find that common ground on what we're doing. I know I've talked to many who are here tonight and who aren't here tonight who have found those really productive. One of the other very valuable aspects of tonight was the very many, tonight was EFACIS, and I want to congratulate EFACIS on such an amazing contribution and collaboration in itself. And our participants tonight from EFACIS, I haven't got everybody on my screen, but I hope I can, that I am seeing as many as I can, including Seán, Radvan, Sylvie, Marguérite, and Katharina. I think I have everybody there, yeah. If we could give them just a virtual bula bus, I suppose that's my, I just think, you know, what you have done tonight is wonderful, and such a coordinated, collaborative, it just shows what is possible. And but in the context of EFACIS, but also in the context of the individual Irish study centres that are located all around Europe, I think we have all really been introduced to a lot of centres, a lot of publications that we haven't been maybe aware of to the full extent in the way we should be. And I certainly want to especially mention RISE and the work that Seán and all of you are doing. It is wonderful, because at the end of the day, our publications are hugely important in making sure that this reaches the next generation. And these are the things that take effort as well. There were a few projects, for example, among, you know, things that have come up, you know, particularly, I think the thing that Hedvig mentioned about funding and the DFA and ESP, and also Kaleidoscope, and all our other organisations that were mentioned, BAIS, CAIS, ACS, ISANS, all of these, and even there are some other ones, some other centres around the world now which are coming up. Maybe I just do want to finish off in the context of the global Irish diaspora, because one of our very strong aims and ethics within the global Irish diaspora is also to include the general public in our discussion. While we are very dependent on our research, for us, I suppose, with Global Irish Diaspora, I'm delighted to hear that, that diaspora is one of the projects that is being addressed within EFACIS. Thank you, that is really heartening. But having travelled, and I know I speak, I know Darragh has done some of the fellowship that I did in Melbourne as well, and only by being there did I realise the whole context of what was really happening out there. And I think, you know, I haven't even started to visit some of the Irish Studies centres in Europe, and I'm hoping I'll be finishing ahead of school in September. And I'm looking forward to a sabbatical, which I'd hoped to have last year and do this work, but actually maybe this year I will get to see and get to visit a lot of this work. I think that this is a very important part of our, you know, I don't like using the word networking, but maybe our community of what we understand in our scholarship, in our research, but also in the building of community in the context of, because a lot of our research is societal based, and that is how we need to reach out. And you know, it's through those that we learn our literature research, our linguistic research. It's all based on you know, how we can improve our society, and you know, in our context in UCD in particular, maybe, you know, empowering humanity, you know, building our society and what we have. So I'm going to wrap up. I've said enough and far too much actually at this stage. I just want to thank you all sincerely for an amazing night. It was really very, very heartening and very enlightening for me actually, because my main area is Irish language, but I've also been involved with the Irish Studies to a huge extent, and started it within the school, and very fortunate that we have Aoife now as our head of Irish Studies. I want to thank especially my committee or our committee, not mine, who set up this event under the Global Irish Diaspora. That's Owen and Barbara, Tig, Liam, and especially Aoife and Darragh with really, this is Darragh's wonderful initiative, and I commend you, Darragh, for taking this to the next level. And of course, I mean, Darragh has said lovely things about me at the beginning of the night. Who wouldn't want to support this? It's a wonderful initiative, and what we need are these shining lights. So thank you all for attending, and I think we're going to break out into just finishing up with the EFACIS group. But to all of the rest of you, I would normally say Slán Abhaile, safe home, but hopefully we will see you at the next one. We have a number of these roundtables coming up, and we hope to see as many of you as possible at the next one, and please look out for the details on our website. Gora maith go agus ihuai.